Men always be scouting girls like,
yo, she got a booty? She got a booty?
meanwhile their butts look like Slim from Bug's Life. I just find that visual so funny. Boys, you gotta be training your booty. I don't care if it's squats, deadlift, you just gotta make it nice and round and big so that the girl has something to grab too, you know? I know that this video is kind of silly right now, but it is actually very serious at the same time. Guys basically expect the girls to have nice, round, big butts, so why shouldn't they expect any less from us? You know how unfair that is? But don't worry boys, I'm gonna teach you how to hip thrust today and get that nice, big, strong, powerful, manly butt. I don't know any other word for it. So check out my blog post linked down below for a very basic outline of how to perform the hip thrust. So this is what the hip thrust looks like. The hip thrust is a glute dominant exercise and will give you many benefits that a lot of lifters, athletes, bodybuilders are all looking for. Number one benefit, you gain functional strength. Due to the relative size of the glutes to the body and the biomechanical position that you're in when performing the hip thrust, you can move a lot of weight. Lifting really heavy will train the brain to recruit more muscle fibers, making you stronger and more powerful. And the strength that you gain in your glutes will translate to the squat, deadlift, pretty much any exercise that involves the legs. Benefit number two, lifting heavy on the hip thrust will trigger more growth in your glutes. And if you combine that with higher reps and longer times under tension, you'll see a lot of muscle mass increase. Benefit number three, performing heavy hip thrusts will lead to increases in power. So you'll be able to extend your hip quicker and stronger than before, allowing you to run faster and jump higher, as both of those movements require fast and strong hip extension. I can't really think of any athlete that should not be doing hip thrusts because it's just such a functional and essential movement to almost any sport. Benefit number four, ask any girl. 9 times out of 10, she's gonna say that a guy with a nice, strong butt is very attractive. I've asked her out a couple times. That's my proof. A shapely butt adds to your overall aesthetic as a lifter, or athlete, or bodybuilder. A lot of the times you'll see inexperienced lifters with a big, well-developed upper body and a less so or non-developed lower body. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I mean, you can do whatever you want. Maybe you want small legs and a big upper body because it'll make you look bigger, I don't know. But I think most people want to strive for that proportional, athletic, strong body. And now we're going to get into very specific body cues to help people perform the hip thrust for those little things that don't necessarily feel right, or you're just not performing the exercise correctly and you just can't tell what it is. These are what these cues are for. So one of the biggest things I emphasize when I'm teaching people how to hip thrust is to keep their upper body rock solid. And when I say this, I mean that your abs, your back, your chest, your arms and shoulders, they don't move. Think of it like a wooden block. The only part that should be moving is your hips and your knees to lift the bar up. You just don't want to be putting unnecessary stress or tension on muscles that may not be able to handle all that weight. This can be your lower back extensors or your abs. Because they're smaller and they perform smaller movements relative to the range of motion of a hip, you can be putting them in danger when you perform hip thrusts incorrectly. What I tell most people to do is, rather than keeping their head neutral throughout the entire movement, I say point your head down a little bit and look at your torso as you perform the movement. You should be able to see your chest rise and fall as you perform the hip thrust. Looking at your chest will just give you a visual cue if your torso is rigid. Examples of what a loose torso would look like is this. As you can see, there's not as much chest movement here, and my torso is flexing and extending with my hips. Here's an even worse example. You can see my chest is almost not moving at all, and it's just my torso flexing and extending with my hips to move the bar. Another very easy cue for the same tip is to set up with good posture in the movement and then don't move your upper body posture from there. Another cue for a really good glute contraction is to posteriorly tilt your pelvis. One of the glute's functions is to posteriorly tilt the pelvis, so adding that to the movement will allow you to use your glutes for their full function. A neutral pelvis is good too, but what you want to avoid is an anterior pelvic tilt. So this is neutral hips, anterior pelvic tilt, posterior pelvic tilt. If you were to put your hands on your hips like this, you can think of neutral as straight up and down, anterior as rolling your hips forward, and posterior as rolling your hips backwards. Another cue for a better glute contraction is to put a band around your knees, and that way you're forcing external rotation, which is another function of the glutes. And when you're leaning against the bench and you find that the bench is sliding backwards, try to focus on putting more weight downwards on the bench rather than leaning backwards against it. It takes a bit of practice, but you can use your feet planted firmly on the ground to help stabilize you while you're finding that perfect angle with enough downforce. Another thing that people ask me is, can my hips and torso go above parallel? And I think this is okay, as long as you keep your neutral spine. Because some people have a really large range of motion for their glutes, so if you were to stop them before reaching parallel, they wouldn't be activating their glutes throughout the full range of motion. Sometimes people have trouble keeping their back from arching, and the way to fix this is to contract your abs harder. So when your back extensors contract, they extend the spine, putting you into an arched position. And what the abs do is they flex the spine, so they bring you forward, kind of like crunching down. So you need to find that happy medium in between both where you can contract both the back and abs and remain in that locked position of a neutral spine. Another issue that a lot of people have is as they lift the bar with their hips, they'll come up onto their toes. And as you do this, you take away contraction from the glutes and you transfer it to your calves. Not only are your calves weaker, it's also creating a less stable foundation for you to lift the bar with. What you can do is stay on your heels the entire time. This forces you not to use your calves and hopefully should help you get a better contraction in your glutes. And another tip, for most leg exercises, you want to keep your knees tracking over your toes. You don't want your knees to cave in or your knees to track too far outside of your toes. Doing either of these will put uneven pressure on the inside or outside of your knees, leading to varus or valgus in the long run. I suggest to open your legs to a medium width. It's safe, effective, and most people get the best contraction when they do this. However, you can narrow your legs to where your knees and toes are touching. Typically, I'll feel it more in my quads and hamstrings when I do this, but for you it might be different. To wrap it up, hip thrusts are essential for athleticism, functionality, and overall aesthetic. I definitely recommend you implement hip thrusts into your program somewhere and just give it a try. I remember the first time I did hip thrusts, and I literally have never experienced a booty pump before, but it was insane. It's the weirdest thing. You're walking funny, but it feels good at the same time. But that's all I gotta say about that. So go out there, do some hip thrusts, get those booty gains, be more attractive, and I hope to see you guys on the next video.